What happens when a federal agent walks into court thinking a gold badge can silence a room, only to discover the one man behind the bench has spent a lifetime staring down power without blinking? Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, because this story starts with arrogance and ends with a reckoning nobody in that courtroom would ever forget. And if you believe respect matters more than rank, hit that subscribe button right now, because the moment Judge Caprio leaned forward and spoke 8 quiet words, everything changed. By 8:37 on a gray Tuesday morning, the hallway outside Municipal Courtroom 3 in Providence, Rhode Island already smelled like wet wool coats, burnt coffee, and old paper. The security scanner beeped every few seconds. People shifted in stiff plastic chairs. A mother bounced a tired toddler on her hip. A construction worker in a neon Carhartt hoodie rubbed the back of his neck and stared at the floor. An elderly woman clutched a tan envelope so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Then the hallway changed. Heads turned before anyone even saw him clearly. That was the effect Special Agent Ethan Mercer liked to have. 42 years old, 6'1", navy Brioni overcoat draped over his shoulders, black tie too tight, hair clipped close on the sides, sharp enough to look military. He moved like a man who had spent 20 years convincing himself that calm authority and intimidation were the same thing. He was not wearing the badge on his belt where it belonged. He had it in his hand. That mattered. Like this video, if you believe the people who show power the fastest are usually the ones most afraid of losing it. Ethan Mercer was with the Office of Inspector General attached to a federal transportation task force out of Boston. On paper, he was impressive. Decorated investigator, former Marine, testified in fraud and corruption cases, quoted in trade journals, featured in a regional magazine profile called Men Who Keep New England Safe. The article had a picture of him leaning against a dark blue Audi Q8 with mirrored sunglasses and a look that said he expected the world to make room. But this morning he wasn't here for a medal. He was here because on February 18, 2026, at 6:12 p.m., at the intersection of Atwells Avenue and Dean Street, his black government-issued Ford Explorer had blown through a stale red light, clipped a silver 2017 Toyota Camry, mounted half the curb, and sent a food delivery scooter skidding into a newspaper box. One woman fractured her wrist. One teenage delivery rider needed 12 stitches above his left eye. And a retired janitor named Louis Delgado had spent 3 nights in Kent County Memorial with bruised ribs and a torn rotator cuff after yanking his granddaughter backward to keep her from being struck. Ethan had not been arrested. He had not even been ticketed at the scene. According to the first report, lights and siren were possibly activated. According to 2 witnesses, they were not. According to traffic camera footage the city initially failed to release, they definitely were not. And that was why the courtroom was crowded. Word had leaked that the driver was federal. Word had spread that the local officer on scene hesitated when he saw the credentials. Word had spread that somebody downtown tried to make the whole thing disappear under the language of interagency courtesy and operational urgency. And now the hearing, which should have been a routine state traffic and reckless endangerment matter, had become the kind of public confrontation people whisper about for years. Share this with someone who needs to see what real accountability looks like. Inside Courtroom 3, everything was smaller than television makes it look. The wood wasn't glossy. The benches creaked. The radiator clicked like it had a grievance. Fluorescent light flattened every face. On the wall hung the state seal, the American flag, and a clock that seemed louder every time nobody spoke. Court Clerk Nancy Morty, 60 years old, silver bob, half-moon glasses on a chain, was organizing case folders in neat stacks. She had worked for the court for 32 years and had the kind of voice that could cut through chaos without ever rising. Beside the side aisle stood Officer Jenna Blythe, a Providence court officer in a pressed dark uniform, hands folded at her waist, expression unreadable. 3 rows back sat Rosa Delgado, 34, Louis's daughter and the mother of 9-year-old Sophia. She wore a brown Target cardigan and a soft blue brace wrapped around her right wrist. Sophia sat beside her, tiny pink sneakers dangling above the floor, holding a folded drawing she had made for her grandfather. 2 seats over sat Malik Thompson, 19, the scooter rider, a CCRI freshman with a narrow band of pale scar still visible through his eyebrow. He kept touching it without realizing. On the aisle sat Dana Pike, the driver of the Camry, a hospice nurse in dark green scrubs, who had come straight off an overnight shift. They were not here for revenge. At least, not all of them. They were here because they wanted someone to say out loud what had happened to them mattered. At 8:59, the side door opened, and Judge Frank Caprio stepped in. He was 89 then, slower than in his younger years, but the room straightened the second he appeared. Dark robe, gentle face, that unmistakable calm. He didn't need volume, he never had. Some people command a room by filling it. He commanded it by emptying it of all pretense. Everyone rose. Everyone except Ethan Mercer. It was subtle, just a beat too late. A refusal small enough to deny, disrespectful enough to register. Nancy noticed. Officer Blythe noticed. Rosa noticed. Most of all, Judge Caprio noticed. He sat, the room sat with him. The first few cases were minor. Parking citations, registration lapses, a stop sign violation where the driver ended up crying because she was working 2 jobs and caring for her mother. Caprio listened, asked questions, corrected one impatient attorney with a look, reduced a fine for a veteran on disability, warned a young man to stop treating red lights like suggestions. The room relaxed into the rhythm of his courtroom, that unusual mixture of firmness and mercy that made people feel seen even while being held accountable. Then Nancy called the case. State of Rhode Island versus Ethan Mercer. Docket number MC 2604187. Reckless driving, failure to obey traffic control device, negligent operation causing bodily injury, and citation review related to incident date February 18, 2026. The room tightened like a fist. Ethan stood with a confidence so practiced it looked automatic. He did not walk to the lectern. He strode. He set a leather folio on the rail. Then, in full view of the gallery, he placed his badge beside it. Not clipped, not tucked away, displayed. A few people inhaled sharply. One man muttered, "Oh boy." Judge Caprio looked at the badge, then at Ethan, then back at the badge. His voice, when it came, was quiet. "Sir, pick that up." The room went still. Ethan smiled, but it wasn't warmth. It was the expression of a man who believed he knew the script better than everyone else. "With respect, Your Honor, I'm identifying myself for the record." Judge Caprio didn't blink. "You were asked to pick it up." That should have been the end of it. It was. Hit that subscribe button if you've ever seen someone mistake position for character. Ethan left the badge exactly where it was. "I think the court should understand the nature of my federal assignment before we move forward." No whisper, no movement. Even the radiator seemed to stop clicking. Judge Caprio folded his hands. "The court understands the nature of this room, sir. In here, your assignment is defendant." That line moved through the courtroom like a current. You could feel people sit straighter. Rose's eyes widened. Malik actually leaned forward. Officer Blythe shifted one step closer, not aggressive, just ready. Ethan's jaw twitched. He hadn't expected resistance. He definitely hadn't expected it from a man old enough to be his grandfather, speaking in a tone soft enough to sound almost kind. He tried a different angle. "I was in active transit, related to a protected federal operation." Caprio nodded once. "Then your attorney will present the legal basis for any claim of immunity, but your badge is not evidence and it is not an argument. Pick it up." Still, Ethan didn't move. That was the moment many in the room would later describe the same way. The moment everyone knew this wasn't really about a traffic case anymore. It was about whether power could stare down accountability and make it look away. Ethan's attorney, a sharp-suited Boston defense lawyer named Colin Veach, finally stepped in. Mid-50s, polished shoes, silk tie, careful voice. "Your Honor, perhaps we can proceed without unnecessary theater." Judge Caprio turned his head just slightly. "Counselor, the only theater I see is a prop left on my bench." A gasp, then silence, thick silence. The kind that tells you people are memorizing what they're seeing because they know millions would watch if there were cameras in every corner. Ethan snatched up the badge, but he did it with enough force to tell the room he felt humiliated. Caprio noticed that too. "Good," the judge said. "Now we can begin as citizens." And right there, with one sentence, the balance of power shifted. But the most damaging evidence hadn't even been mentioned yet. Because hidden inside the case file on Nancy Morty's desk, clipped beneath the accident diagram and witness statements, was a supplemental memorandum stamped "received only the night before." It contained the thing Ethan Mercer believed had already been buried: a second camera angle, a body cam clip, and a sworn letter from the officer who had first responded, explaining why his original report had been altered after a phone call from someone who knew. Ver expected that letter to see daylight. Nobody in that room knew how bad this was about to get. On February 18, the accident happened in one of those chaotic dusk windows when city streets stop making sense. Snowmelt at the curb, headlights reflecting off wet pavement, delivery drivers rushing dinner orders, pedestrians trying to beat the cold. Dana Pike had been driving home from Hope Hospice after a 12-hour shift. She picked up soup from Venda ravioli for her mother, who was recovering from knee surgery. Luis Delgado was walking Sophia back from buying a school poster board for a history project. Malik Thompson was on his scooter with a thermal delivery bag strapped behind him, trying to make enough money that week to cover books he couldn't afford through financial aid. All of them entered that intersection legally. Ethan Mercer did not. The city camera mounted above a brick storefront caught the light changing. Dana's Camry started forward. Lewis stepped into the crosswalk. Malik entered from the right lane. Then a dark SUV shot into frame from the cross street at what one analyst later estimated to be 51 miles per hour in a 30 zone. No siren, no flashing lights. Impact. Dana's car spun half around. Malik was launched sideways, helmet cracking against the curb. Lewis pulled Sophia so hard the sleeve of her winter coat tore at the wrist. Soup containers exploded across the inside of Dana's windshield. Somebody screamed. Brakes shrieked late, not before. And within seconds, according to 3 witnesses, Ethan Mercer got out, held up a badge, and said the words that would haunt him later. "Federal business, everyone calm down. Not is anyone hurt. Not call an ambulance. Not I'm sorry. Federal business." Drop a comment telling us the exact moment you would have stopped believing him. When Judge Caprio asked for the state to proceed, Assistant City Solicitor Marlene Velez rose from counsel table with a stack of binders thick enough to look theatrical until she started speaking. 47, immaculate charcoal suit, no wasted motions. She wasn't flashy. She was prepared, and sometimes that is far more dangerous. "The state is ready, Your Honor." "Proceed." She began with the basics: time, place, charges. She established the injuries. She identified the victims. Then she asked permission to play the first video. Colin Veach objected immediately. "Foundation. We also still maintain there are federal preemption issues unresolved." Caprio looked down at his notes. "I'll take the objection under advisement after I see what we're discussing. Overruled for now." The monitor at the side wall flickered on. Grainy at first, then clear enough. People in the gallery leaned to see. You could hear coats rustle, a throat clear, one tiny child whisper, "Is that the car?" Marlene froze the frame 3 seconds before impact. She enlarged the traffic signal. Red, bright red, undeniable. Then she pressed play. The room heard the hit before it fully processed it. A blunt metallic crack, Dana's shout, a scrape that turned the spine cold, Sophia's high, terrified cry, Malik disappearing sideways out of frame. Rosa covered her mouth. Louis, sitting farther back with his arms still stiff from physical therapy, stared without blinking. Ethan did not watch the screen. He watched the room watching him. That told Caprio more than any attorney's argument could. When the clip ended, there was a silence so complete you could hear the fluorescent ballast buzzing. Marlene spoke into it carefully. The state notes no emergency lights visible in the frame. Colin stood. The angle is incomplete. So is your explanation, Marlene said. Counsel, Caprio warned, but there was no real heat in it. He had seen something now. Everyone had. Ethan finally spoke. Your Honor, with all due respect, surveillance footage doesn't show classified exigency. Caprio turned toward him. It does show a red light. That was quote number one people would repeat in barbershops, break rooms, and family dinners all over Providence once the story got out. It was short, clean, impossible to wriggle around. But Ethan still had one card left, and he played it hard. He leaned forward and said, I had reason to believe delay would compromise an operation involving public safety. Marlene didn't even sit down, then produced the operation log. A pause. Then Colin answered instead, that material is sensitive. Caprio said, sensitive is not the same as magical. If it exists, it can be described, reviewed, or defended through proper channels. What I will not accept is a man injures 3 citizens and asks this court to infer necessity from the shine of his badge. Another line, another murmur in the gallery, another crack in Ethan Mercer's confidence. And still the worst part had not surfaced. Because Marlene Velez had saved that for the next witness. Officer Thomas Leduc had been a patrolman for 11 years, 36, broad shoulders, close-cropped B. RD, he had responded first to the crash. When he stepped to the stand, he looked like a man who had slept badly for weeks. He swore in. He sat. He glanced once toward Ethan, then looked away so fast it was obvious history lived there. Marlene asked him to describe the scene. He did, professional, crisp, injuries observed, EMS request, vehicle positions, initial statements. Then she approached the fault line. Officer Leduc, did the defendant identify himself to you on scene? Yes. How? He displayed a federal badge and credentials. Did that affect your actions? Colin was up instantly. Objection. Overruled, Caprio said. Leduc swallowed. Yes. In what way? I hesitated to issue a citation pending supervisor instruction. The room shifted again. People knew what that meant even if no one said it. Marlene took one more step. Was your first written report later changed? Leduc's left hand tightened on the rail. Yes. By whom? I amended it after speaking with Lieutenant Gerard Haynes. Why? Long pause. Leduc looked at Judge Caprio, then at the victims, then finally at Ethan Mercer. Because I was told the defendant was operating under federal urgency, and that language in my original report could create interagency complications. Rosa whispered, "Oh my God." Marlene lifted a document. Is this your supplemental letter dated March 28, 2026, addressed to Internal Affairs and copied to this court? It is. Why did you write it? That was the moment the whole case changed. Leduc's voice dropped, because the original report didn't tell the truth. No one moved. Not Ethan, not Colin, not even Caprio for half a second. Then the courtroom erupted into a wave of sound that never quite became noise, because Officer Bly stepped forward and Nancy snapped, "Order." Judge Caprio lifted one hand. Silence returned. But Ethan's face had changed. The color drained first. Then the hard confidence around the eyes loosened, not into humility yet, but into calculation. He was realizing the same thing everyone else was. This was no longer a simple hearing, with a local judge and a few traffic counts. This was a credibility collapse. Like this video, if you believe one honest witness can outweigh 1,000 excuses. Colin tried to recover. "Your Honor, the officer is speculating about operational context outside his knowledge." Marlene was ready. "I'm asking about report alteration, not espionage." Caprio nodded. "And I'm listening to an officer tell me he omitted truth because authority leaned on him. That concerns this court deeply." He turned to Leduc. "Officer, when you say the original report didn't tell the truth, be precise." Leduc took a breath that sounded painful. The defendant's emergency lights were not activated before entering the intersection. Not in my observation. Not according to 2 civilian witnesses I spoke with before I was told to revise language. And the defendant did not initially ask about injured civilians. His first statement to me was, "I need this handled quietly." The whole room reacted, gasps, whispering. Dana Pike shut her eyes. Malik's scarred hand balled into a fist. Lewis lowered his head. Ethan spoke before his lawyer could stop him. "That's not what I said." Leduc snapped back. "That's exactly what you said." There it was. Raw, uncontrolled, human. The kind of exchange that feels like it should only happen in movies until you see 2 men stake their dignity on opposite versions of one moment and realize this is how institutions crack. Judge Caprio leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Mercer, you will have your turn. Do not interrupt testimony." Ethan looked at him and, for the first time, didn't look sure he was the strongest man in the room. Marlene introduced the supplemental letter. Then she asked for the body cam. Colin objected again. Hearsay, context, chain of custody, prejudice. Caprio listened to every word. Then he said, "If the defense wants context, I am eager to hear it. Play the footage." The clip began with shaking motion and heavy breathing, Officer Leduc running toward the crash, sirens in the distance, somebody crying, Dana's voice repeating, my arm," Malik moaning, Sophia sobbing, "Grandpa, Grandpa." Then the camera caught Ethan Mercer beside his SUV, coat open, phone in one hand, badge in the other. Leduc on the audio, "Sir, were your lights engaged?" Ethan, sharp and irritated, "I'm federal. We don't need a sidewalk debate." Leduc, "Were they on?" Ethan, "I said I'm federal." The video ended there. It was enough. In the back row, someone actually muttered, "He's cooked." Judge Caprio did not smile. He did not gloat. He did not need to. The authority in his face came from disappointment, and sometimes disappointment is heavier than anger. Then came the first true cliff edge of the morning. Because just when Ethan's position seemed to be collapsing, Colin Veach stood and introduced a sealed envelope he claimed would substantially alter the court's undurst. Ending of the defendant's actions. He said it contained certification from a federal supervisor confirming Mercer had been acting under time-sensitive operational direction connected to a credible interstate threat. The gallery buzzed. If true, everything could shift again. Were the victims collateral in a larger emergency? Had Ethan been reckless, or had he made the wrong choice during a real threat? Was the state about to be humiliated after all? Even Judge Caprio paused before responding. And for the first time that morning, Rosa Delgado looked afraid not just of what had happened, but of what might still be excused. Share this with someone who has seen powerful people hide behind sealed paperwork. Caprio reviewed the envelope without opening it right away. Is the state aware of this submission? Marlene answered, We were notified of its existence 36 minutes ago. We have not seen the contents." "Why the delay?" Caprio asked. Colin's tone was smooth again, relieved to have something solid to stand on. "Federal clearance procedures." Caprio stared at him long enough for the room to understand he hated surprises wrapped in hierarchy. "This court does not enjoy being managed by the clock, counselor." He slit the envelope. Nancy Morty would later tell a friend that she knew the result before Caprio finished the first page because his eyebrows moved exactly once. That was all. But if you knew him, it was enough. He read, set the page down, read again. Then he looked over his glasses at Ethan Mercer. "Mr. Mercer, please stand." Ethan rose. "Is it your position that this letter justifies your conduct?" Colin answered for him. "It confirms he was engaged in a time-sensitive protective surveillance matter." Caprio held up the document. "No, it confirms he was en route to support a surveillance team already on station. It does not authorize traffic violations without emergency protocol. It does not waive state law. And most importantly, it states in plain English that agents are to operate in compliance with local motor vehicle rules absent immediate life-threatening necessity." That sentence landed like a hammer. Ethan's eyes flicked toward Colin. Colin's face tightened. Marlene didn't move, but you could almost feel the satisfaction radiating off her. Caprio continued, voice still level. "This letter does not save you. It condemns your judgment." There was the revelation, there was the consequence, there was the twist, but wait, there was more. Because tucked behind the supervisor certification was another page, apparently included by mistake or carelessness. An internal notation, not classified, just bureaucratic and devastating. Caprio read it slowly, then said, "Counselor, were you aware this attachment reflects the defendant was behind schedule due to a personal stop?" Colin turned, "Your Honor." Caprio lifted the page. At 5:41 p.m. the defendant vehicle was logged stationary near Smith Street. Annotated reason, coffee pickup. The gallery exploded. Not for an emergency, not for a child, not for a bomb threat. Coffee. Ethan's shoulders went rigid. Colin whispered something furious under his breath. Marlene closed her eyes for half a second like she almost couldn't believe her luck. Rosa began crying, not loudly, just the silent kind that comes when outrage finally finds proof. Judge Caprio looked at Ethan Mercer with a sadness so direct it felt worse than contempt. 3 people were hurt because you were late and chose to make that everyone else's problem. That line spread through the room like fire. Dana Pike lowered her face into her hands. Malik whispered, "Unbelievable." Luis Delgado stared at Ethan with the tired expression of a man who had worked 40 years and met this kind of selfishness before. Ethan tried to speak. "Your Honor, that characterization is—" Caprio cut him off. "Do not talk over the truth while it is still standing." That was quote number 4, and perhaps the most shareable of all. You could see the moment of realization begin. Not complete, not clean, but begin. Ethan Mercer, who had entered with his badge in his hand and his chin lifted like the room was beneath him, was now being forced to stand still while every polished layer of his identity peeled away under fluorescent light. And then came the human cost. Marlene called Rosa Delgado. She took the stand carefully, left hand steadying her right wrist. She gave her name, her age, her relation to Louis and Sophia. Her voice shook once and then settled into something stronger. She described the sound first. "I still hear it, that metal sound at night." She described Sophia's scream. Her father twisting so hard to shield the child that he fell awkwardly on the curb and couldn't lift his arm for days. She described the emergency room smell. Bleach, coffee, fear. She described having to explain to Sophia why Grandpa was sleeping in a recliner because lying flat hurt too much. Then she pulled out a folded paper from her Urs. A letter, she said. Caprio nodded. You may read it if you wish. It's from my daughter. Sophia sat up straighter. The whole room softened around her instantly. Rosa unfolded the page. She asked me to read this because she says her voice gets small in court. Some people smiled through tears before Rosa even began. She wrote, Dear Judge, I don't know how court works, but I know my grandpa is brave. He pulled me back so the big car didn't hit me. He makes pancakes in funny shapes, but now he can't flip them right because his shoulder hurts. My mom cries in the kitchen when she thinks I don't see. If the man with the badge says sorry, I want him to mean it. If he doesn't mean it, then I want you to make him learn how. No one in that room could escape that. Officer Blythe looked down. Nancy Morty took off her glasses. Even Colin Veach lost the polished detachment for a moment. Ethan Mercer did not look at Sophia. That mattered too. Like this video, if you believe children tell the truth, adults spend years avoiding. Next came Dana Pike. She wasn't theatrical. She was exhausted, which somehow made her testimony hit harder. She explained that she had worked the night shift at hospice for 11 years, that she was used to watching families on the worst day of their lives, that she had never imagined an ordinary drive home would leave her unable to fasten her bra one-handed for 2 weeks because of a shoulder strain and bruised collarbone. Then she said something the room would never forget. I help dying people keep their dignity. And at that scene, when I was bleeding and shaking, he looked at me like I was paperwork. That sentence cut deeper than almost anything else said that day. Malik Thompson followed. 19. Black North Face jacket zipped to the chin, voice low at first. He admitted he had almost skipped coming because he figured nobody important cared what happened to a food courier. Then he looked directly at Caprio and said, I came because my mother said if I stayed quiet, I'd be helping him do it to the next person. He described waking up on the curb tasting blood and asphalt. He described missing a chemistry exam, losing scooter income, having stitches removed alone because his mom couldn't leave work. He described opening social media and seeing strangers debating whether people like him are real victims when government vehicles are involved. Then Marlene asked, What stayed with you the most? Malik answered without hesitation, He never asked my name. Silence again, heavy witness silence, truth silence. Ethan's face tightened, but this time it wasn't anger. It was strain, the first hairline fracture of shame. Then came the choice moment. Judge Caprio turned to the defense and said, Counselor, after what I have heard, I will ask plainly. Is your client contesting the facts of injury and conduct, or are we now discussing responsibility? Colin Veach requested a 5-minute recess. Caprio granted 3. That recess became the second act in miniature. The courtroom doors opened. The gallery spilled into the hall like water released from a dam. Everybody talked at once, but in hushed voices because that's what people do when they feel they've witnessed something sacred and ugly at the same time. Rosa hugged Sophia. Louis sat heavily and rubbed his shoulder. Malik leaned against the wall while Dana handed him a tissue from her scrub pocket. Nancy carried files to chambers. Officer Blythe stayed by the rail. And Ethan Mercer stood near the defense table, while Colin Veach hissed at him in a voice too low to hear, but angry enough to read on his face. Then something unexpected happened. Judge Caprio, on his way through the side door, stopped beside Ethan and said quietly, not for the room but not fully private either, Son, the law can punish arrogance. Only truth can cure it. Decide what kind of day this will be. He kept walking. Ethan stood frozen. Nobody heard Colin anymore. Nobody cared. Because that line was the first time Caprio had spoken to Ethan not as a defendant to be managed, but as a human being with a final chance to step back from the edge. Would he take it? When court resumed, the answer seemed to come quickly. Collins stood and announced that his client would stipulate to the traffic signal violation and negligent operation, but continued to dispute the characterization of reckless indifference and the implication of intentional concealment. It was a partial retreat, a tactical surrender dressed as nuance. Marlene almost laughed but didn't. Then Caprio did something nobody expected. He said, "Before we proceed further, I want to hear from Mr. Mercer directly, not as an agent, not through counsel, as the man who drove the vehicle." Colin objected, briefly, futilely. Ethan rose. This should have been the start of his apology. Instead, it nearly destroyed him. He began in the language arrogant men use when they want credit for almost admitting fault. "First, I regret that Opel were injured. That was never my intention. But I think it's important to understand the pressures of federal field work and the split-second judgments." Caprio raised one finger. "Stop." Ethan stopped. "You are still explaining yourself before you have acknowledged them." He gestured not toward the state, not toward the camera monitor, but toward Rosa, Louis, Sophia, Dana, and Malik. "In this courtroom," Caprio said, "injured people are not scenery for your defense." There was the breakdown beginning. Not tears, not yet, but the structure cracked. Ethan swallowed. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. He turned slightly toward the gallery. "I should have checked on you first." No one reacted. It was too small, too late, too polished. Caprio saw that too. "You should have," he said. "But that is still about what you should have done. Tell them what you did." Ethan stared at the rail. The badge in his pocket suddenly seemed to weigh 50 pounds. "I drove through the light." He said it like glass. "Louder," Caprio said. "I drove through the red light. And I didn't have my lights activated. And—" Ethan shut his eyes for 1 second too long. "I used my position to try to control the scene." There it was. No lawyer could soften it. No memo could bury it. No title could outrank it. Everyone in the room knew they had crossed the midpoint where denial dies. Drop a comment telling us whether you think that confession came from truth or pressure. But before anyone could settle into the satisfaction of justice served, Marlene Velez asked for permission to introduce one final exhibit. The state believes it bears directly on consciousness of guilt. Caprio allowed it. It was a voicemail transcription. Sent at 7:03 p.m. the night of the crash to Lieutenant Gerard Haynes, the supervisor who had encouraged report revisions. The audio itself was scratchy, but the words were clear enough. "Gerard, it's Mercer. Need a friendly hand here. Local guy, asking too many questions. Civilians banged up but nothing catastrophic. Call Providence and get this into the right lane before paperwork becomes theater." There are moments when shame enters a room physically. You can almost hear it breathing. This was one of them. Ethan sank back half an inch like he had actually been struck. Colin Veach said nothing. There was nothing left to say. Judge Caprio asked only one question. "Mr. Mercer, is that your voice?" Barely audible, Ethan answered, "Yes." Marlene sat. And now the courtroom crossed into the zone viewers dream about in a story like this, the place where justice doesn't feel theoretical anymore. The villain has been caught. The proof is undeniable. The crowd can feel the sentence coming. The gavel is somewhere ahead like thunder over water. But the story still had another turn. Because true courtroom drama is not just punishment, it is revelation. And the deeper revelation in this room was not that Ethan Mercer had been arrogant. It was why. Judge Caprio asked the room for patience. Then he asked Ethan a question so unexpected it seemed almost merciful. "Who taught you that admitting wrong makes you smaller?" Ethan looked up, confused. The courtroom waited. Caprio repeated it. "Because that is what I'm seeing. A man so terrified of being reduced that he'd rather damage strangers than appear fallible. Colin shifted, maybe thinking this had gone too personal. He was wrong. This was where the truth lived. And for the first time all morning, Ethan Mercer's voice no longer sounded official. "My father," he said. "Nobody expected that." He swallowed hard. He was NYPD, 28 years, Bronx. He used to say you only lose control once. If people smell weakness, they own you forever. He gave a dry laugh with no humor in it. In my line of work, that kind of thinking gets rewarded. Command presence, decisiveness, never back down. Caprio listened. Ethan went on, words coming uneven now. "You spend enough years in federal service and everyone around you treats urgency like a virtue. Move fast, push through. Don't let civilians complicate operations. Don't get second-guessed by locals." I told myself I was protecting the mission, but the truth is I was protecting my ego. That hit harder than the confession. Because now the room wasn't just watching a powerful man get cornered. It was watching him meet himself. Rose's expression changed first. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But the rigid anger loosened into something more complicated. Dana looked down. Malik leaned back. Even Lewis, who had every reason to hate the man, stared with the weary curiosity people feel when they see pride stripped away and something smaller, sadder, and more ordinary underneath. Judge Caprio spoke softly. "The badge didn't make you above the law. It made you responsible to it. And responsibility without humility becomes danger." That was quote number 5, and maybe the wisest of the day. Then came the climax, building toward its highest point. Caprio R. Eviewed the legal options on the record: fines, license suspension recommendation, restitution orders, referral for further criminal review, mandatory driving re-education, judicial censure, notification to federal oversight bodies. He laid them out slowly, making the stakes clear. Then he looked at the victims and did something deeply important. He asked each of them what justice would mean. Rosa said, "I want him to stop acting like hurting regular people is a scheduling problem." Dana said, "I want him to remember our faces." Malik said, "I want something on the record that says what happened matters even if your paycheck says federal." Luis Delgado, voice rough from age and pain, said, "I want my granddaughter to grow up knowing no one gets a pass for almost killing her because of a title." And little Sophia, with permission, held up her drawing. It showed a judge, a little girl, and a man putting down a shiny badge. Across the top in uneven crayon she had written, "Be nice first." The room broke. Not loudly, just enough. Sniffles, lowered heads, a bailiff looking away, Nancy dabbing her eyes with a folded tissue and pretending she had dust in them. If this had been the ending, it would already have been a powerful story. But around what would have been the 6,000-word mark in a perfect retention chart, the ultimate confrontation finally arrived. Judge Caprio called Ethan Mercer back to the center and said, "Mr. Mercer, here is what I know. You violated state law. You endangered citizens. You invoked federal status to distort accountability. You attempted quiet handling. You benefited from hesitation that ordinary people do not receive. And yet, what concerns me most is this: you had every opportunity to become honest before this courtroom forced you to." Then he paused. The pause mattered. In great courtroom moments, silence is not emptiness, it is pressure. Caprio continued, "So I am going to do 2 things today. First, I am going to punish your conduct. Second, I am going to give you a chance to decide whether this becomes the worst thing you ever did or the first honest thing you build from." Ethan stood perfectly still. The sentence came in layers. A finding sustaining the violations. A maximum municipal fine on the moving violations before the court. Full restitution to all injured parties. Immediate referral to the Rhode Island Attorney General for review of reckless endangerment and potential obstruction-related conduct. Recommendation of license suspension pending state review. Formal transmission of the record to Ethan's Federal Oversight Office. Every line was a blow. And then Caprio added one more. You will also, if the victims consent, appear in this courtroom 90 days from today with written proof of completed restitution, trauma response driving instruction, and no fewer than 100 hours of unpaid service with a rehabilitation or victim support program not affiliated with law enforcement. It was devastating, public corrective unavoidable. The room exhaled all at once. Justice served. But then Caprio looked at Rosa, Dana, Malik, and Lewis. That condition requires their agreement, because accountability is not another thing I do to them without asking. That detail elevated the whole moment. It shifted power back where it belonged. Rosa nodded first, Dana after a second. Malik hesitated, then said yes. Lewis took longest, then slowly inclined his head. Sophia smiled without fully understanding what had just happened, only that the adults around her felt lighter. Ethan finally spoke, voice cracked. I accept. Caprio answered, no, you earn. That line went straight into legend. Like this video, if you believe the best judges know the difference between punishment and transformation. Then, just when the room began to settle, the unexpected twist around the 7,000-word mark dropped with brutal precision. Nancy Morty hurried a slip of paper to the bench. Caprio read it, his expression changed, not dramatically, just enough. He looked toward the rear doors. It appears we have a representative from the defendant's agency requesting permission to address the court. Heads whipped around. A woman in a dark plum suit stood from the back row, mid-40s, black leather portfolio, controlled posture. Helen Sutter, Deputy General Counsel, Office of Inspector General. Even Ethan looked stunned. He clearly had not expected headquarters to send anyone. Caprio allowed her forward. Sutter didn't waste time. Your Honor, I am not here to interfere. I am here because the record developed this morning raises concerns beyond traffic enforcement. The agency has placed Special Agent Mercer on administrative leave effective immediately pending full review. The room lit up again. She continued, additionally, Lieutenant Gerard Haynes has been relieved of supervisory field duty pending investigation into report interference. Officer Leda closed his eyes and breathed out like he had been carrying a boulder. Helen Sutter turned slightly, not to the judge but toward the victims. No federal authority permits disregard for local safety law in the circumstances described here. That is the position of the agency. There it was, the final institutional wall collapsing. Ethan looked like a man watching a bridge fall while still standing on it. Caprio nodded once, thank you, counselor. But Sutter wasn't done. She opened the portfolio and withdrew a folded sheet. One additional matter. The agency reviewed regional dispatch and vehicle telemetry this morning. Data indicates Special Agent Mercer accelerated from 32 to 49 miles per hour over an 11-second window after receiving notice that another team member had already secured visual contact with the subject. In plain terms, he was not racing to prevent loss. He was racing not to look late. No one spoke, no one could. That one sentence stripped away the last refuge of urgency. Ethan lowered his head. And then, because life rarely lands one blow at a time, the real emotional breakdown arrived. Rosa Delgado stood up unexpectedly from the gallery. Why didn't you just say that at the beginning? It wasn't shouted, that made it worse. Ethan looked at her, actually looked at her for the first time. Rosa's eyes were wet but steady. Do you know what my daughter asked me that night? She asked if the man with the badge was allowed to scare us because he worked for the government. I didn't know what to tell her. Ethan's mouth trembled once. Dana rose too, And I went home thinking maybe I should have just stayed quiet because people like you always have a reason." Malik remained seated, but his voice carried. "I missed class, missed work, got stitched up, and the whole time I felt stupid for believing anybody would care." Louis slowly pushed himself to his feet, arms stiff. "You almost taught my granddaughter that uniforms protect themselves first." That did it. Ethan Mercer broke. Not elegantly, not movie perfect. Real people almost never do. His breath hitched. He gripped the rail. One hand went to his forehead. When he spoke, the words came out wrecked. "Because if I said it out loud, then I had to be the man who did it." There it was, the bottom. No performance left. No badge left. No federal mystique. Just a 42-year-old man finally seeing that the thing he feared most wasn't punishment, it was clarity. Caprio let the silence hold him there. He did not rescue him from it. Great judges know when mercy begins with allowing a person to feel the full weight of what they have made. Then Ethan turned toward the victims, shoulders shaking once, and said, "I saw your injuries and made them secondary to my reputation. I was wrong. I was cowardly. And I am sorry. Not regret, not if anyone was hurt, sorry." Sophia tugged Rosa's sleeve and whispered something. Rosa bent down, listened, then looked at the bench. "Your Honor," she said carefully, "my daughter wants to know if sorry means he has to be nice now forever." The courtroom actually laughed through tears. Even Caprio smiled. He answered, "That is an excellent legal question." Then he looked at Ethan. "Well." Ethan wiped at his face, half embarrassed, half destroyed. "Yes," he said, "forever would be a good place to start." And just like that, the story pivoted from schadenfreude to something far rarer online, the beginning of earned empathy. Share this with someone who believes accountability and compassion can exist in the same room. Judge Caprio then did one final extraordinary thing before adjourning. He invited Officer Thomas Leduc back to the stand. "Officer, you corrected the record. That has a cost. The law depends on people willing to pay it. This court notes your conduct." Leduc nodded, jaw tight. "Thank you, Your Honor." Caprio added, "Never let a louder title borrow your spine." There was another quote, maybe the last one anyone needed. Court recessed at 11:14 a.m. People stood slowly like they had come out of weather. Hallway chatter exploded the second the doors opened. Not gossip, processing. Everyone replaying lines, everyone calling someone, everyone saying some version of, "You should have been there." By noon, a local legal blogger had posted a summary. By 2, Providence radio hosts were talking about the badge hearing. By evening, clips reconstructed from transcripts, hallway interviews, and witness retellings were everywhere. "Federal agent humiliated in Caprio court" was the crude version, but people who had actually been there knew that wasn't what made it powerful. It wasn't humiliation. It was exposure. Humiliation ends at shame. Exposure can lead somewhere. The next 90 days would determine whether Ethan Mercer's courtroom collapse was just another viral morality tale or the first chapter of a real redemption. And at first, nobody believed redemption was possible. Marlene Velez later admitted she expected his lawyers to appeal everything. Colin Veach filed only narrow procedural reservations, then stepped back. Helen Sutter's office sent confirmation of leave status. Restitution paperwork began arriving within 2 weeks. Dana got full reimbursement for medical costs and vehicle repair deductibles. Malik received lost income compensation and tuition support from a victim fund the agency quietly helped expedite. Luis Delgado's physical therapy copays were covered. Rosa received a handwritten note from Ethan's attorney requesting permission for direct apology. She ignored it for 13 days. Then on April 22, 2026, something happened that changed her mind. A certified letter arrived, not from a lawyer, not on agency letterhead, but from Ethan Mercer himself. No badge seal, no credentials under the signature, just a plain return address from a temporary apartment in Cranston. Rosa read it 3 times before telling anyone. He wrote that he had started volunteering at Rhode Island Hospital's Trauma Family Assistance Desk, because that was the placement arranged through the court-approved service program. He wrote that the first week he couldn't sleep after hearing a child crying in the emergency corridor, because it brought back Sophia's voice at the crash scene. He wrote that every instinct in him still wanted to defend, explain, contextualize, but that he had finally understood explanation is sometimes just cowardice wearing a tie. He enclosed no request for forgiveness. Only one sentence stood out like it had been written with shaking hands. I spent half my life trying to look strong, and one morning in your judge's courtroom taught me I had never once practiced being decent. Rosa cried when she got to that line, not because he deserved it, because truth, when it finally arrives, can be strangely beautiful even in the mouth of someone who caused pain. She showed the letter to Lewis. He read it, handed it back, and said, "We'll see what 90 days looks like." That became the standard. We'll see. Meanwhile, Ethan's world had shrunk. Administrative leave turned into internal review. His colleagues stopped texting. A few sent private messages, supportive in tone but careful in wording, the kind people send when they don't want to be attached to your downfall. The magazine that once profiled him quietly removed his feature from its homepage. The Audi Q8 was gone. He'd sold it to cover legal and restitution costs after unpaid leave became a possibility. He was driving a used gray Subaru Outback with a dent near the rear bumper. By the time spring warmed the sidewalks, he reported to service in plain clothes. No one called him agent. Most called him Ethan. A few at first called him sir until he asked them not to. At the trauma desk he met families on terrible days. People waiting outside CT scan rooms. Mothers asking if their sons would walk again. Husbands holding purses and jackets while surgeons worked behind swinging doors. He handed out forms, poured water, called interpreters, sat with silence. The kind of work he once would have considered beneath his training began teaching him everything his training never had. One evening, a nurse named Teresa Hall found him standing frozen near the pediatric corridor, while a little girl sobbed inside an exam room. "You can't fix it by staring," she said. "I know." "Good," Teresa replied. "Then do the useful thing, get the mother a chair." That line stayed with him. By mid-May he had logged 87 service hours. No shortcuts, no photos, no press. Helen Sutter later confirmed he had also enrolled on his own in a professional ethics counseling program used for federal misconduct remediation. Again, no public announcement, just quiet work. And still, when July 7 arrived and Courtroom 3 filled for the 90-day review, nobody knew whether the victims would accept that change as real. The room looked different in summer light. More sun through the high windows, less damp wool, more air conditioner hum, same benches, same seal, same clock, same sense that something important might happen where ordinary furniture sat witness to human pride and human repair. Nancy Morty called the case. Ethan Mercer stood again before Judge Caprio. But nothing about him looked the same. No Brioni overcoat, no polished swagger, no visible badge. Navy blazer from somewhere modest, maybe Macy's, light blue shirt with sleeves slightly wrinkled. He held a manila folder against his chest like a student about to defend bad grades. His face looked thinner, softer somehow, older in a truer way. Rosa, Lewis, Sophia, Dana, and Malik were all there. So was Officer Leduc. So was Helen Sutter. And for a second, before anyone spoke, everyone in the room remembered the man who had once placed a badge on the rail like it was a trump card, and wondered whether the person standing there now was a performance too. Judge Caprio asked for documentation, restitution complete, service hours complete, 126, Driving rehabilitation, sir. Certificate complete. Ethics counseling participation verified. Agency review ongoing. Caprio flipped through the pages. You exceeded the ordered service. Ethan nodded. Yes, Your Honor. Why? Because 100 felt like a finish line. I didn't want one. That was the first answer all morning that made Rosa believe him. Caprio then did what few judges bother to do. He asked not what Ethan had done, but what he had learned. Ethan took a breath. That urgency is often vanity with better branding. That people in pain know when you're listening and when you're managing them. That authority without humility makes cowards of men who call themselves strong. And that the moment I flashed my badge in this courtroom, I wasn't acting powerful. I was admitting I had nothing else. Nobody wrote that for him, you could tell. Then he turned, with the court's permission, toward the victims. To Dana, I remember your face now. You were right, I treated you like paperwork. To Malik, you said I never asked your name. I've thought about that almost every day. I'm sorry, Malik. To Lewis, you did what I should have done. You protected a child first. To Rosa, you asked why I didn't say it at the beginning, because I was small, that's the truth. And then he knelt, not dramatically, just enough to be eye level with Sophia. I'm trying to be nice now forever, he said. The entire room exhaled. Sophia studied him with the unfiltered seriousness of children deciding whether adults are safe. Then she handed him a new drawing. This one showed the shiny badge in a drawer. Next to it was a little heart and a judge in a robe. Across the top it said, "Learn first." That was the forgiveness twist. Not full absolution, not easy mercy, something better. A child's version of accountability. I see what you did and I'm watching what you do next. Like this video, if you believe the strongest apologies are the ones that cost something. Then Rosa stood. If the court allows, she said, I want to say something. Caprio nodded. Rosa faced Ethan, shoulders square. I don't trust titles much, not after this, but I've read your letter. I called the hospital. I asked if you actually showed up. They said you did, more than required. I'm not saying one season erases what happened. It doesn't. My father still hurts. My daughter still startles at speeding engines. But I think punishment already happened. So today I'm asking for something harder. Ethan looked genuinely confused. What? I want you to keep going. Silence, then tears sudden and hot in Ethan's eyes again. Rosa continued, not because I owe you grace, because if all this ends with one man embarrassed, then we learned nothing. If it ends with one powerful man becoming useful, maybe that matters. That was moral complexity competitors never reach. Not revenge, not cheap redemption, a demand for ongoing service. Dana rose next. I agree, but I want it on the record that he doesn't get to call himself changed after 90 days. Malik added, yeah, change is boring, that's how you know it's real. Keep doing boring good stuff. Even Lewis, stern Luis Delgado, gave a small nod. And drive like everyone else matters. Laughter soft and healing. Judge Caprio smiled then, but only briefly. That may be the wisest sentence spoken in this courtroom. He addressed Ethan. Do you accept the burden these people are placing on you? Yes. Say it properly. Ethan straightened. Yes, Your Honor. I accept that change has to be proven longer than harm took to cause. Caprio leaned back. This court cannot supervise your soul, he said. Only your conduct. But today I note that conduct has begun to move in the right direction. The formal conditions before this court are satisfied. The deeper sentence, Mr. Mercer, is now yours to carry. Then he added one final piece that would echo far beyond Providence. The law's job is not to remind the powerless they are small. It is to remind the powerful they are not larger than the rest of us. Every person in that room knew they had heard something worth carrying home. Court adjourned. But the story didn't end there. 3 months later, in October 2026, Rosa received another letter. This one contained no apology at all, only updates. Ethan had resigned before the federal review could terminate him. He was working as a civilian compliance trainer for a nonprofit that helped local agencies build trauma-informed response policies. He had volunteered to speak privately with law enforcement academies about authority, public trust, and the danger of status reflex. He enclosed a photo of a poster from one of those sessions, not of himself, but of the line he now used at the top of every lecture. A badge is not permission, it is responsibility. Rosa showed the letter to Lewis. He read it twice and said, "Maybe the judge was right." "About what?" she asked. Lewis looked at Sophia, who was drawing at the kitchen table. "That the worst thing a person does doesn't have to be the last true thing about them. That's the part people forget when they chase only the destruction. Destruction is easy to watch, harder to remember, harder to build from. But transformation, real transformation, demands witnesses too." And there were witnesses. Teresa Hall from the hospital later wrote a note to Judge Caprio saying Ethan Mercer was annoyingly punctual, painfully earnest, and finally learning how to listen before speaking. Officer Thomas Leduc received a commendation after internal review validated his correction to the report. Helen Sutter pushed through a procedural reform requiring clearer federal-local crash reporting in the region. Malik Thompson finished the semester, passed chemistry, and told a campus panel that one courtroom taught me the system can still surprise you. Dana Pike kept the restitution check stub in a drawer, not because of the money, but because it reminded her that being treated like paperwork is not the same as being powerless. Sophia, months later, still told people the judge was the nice grandpa man who made the shiny badge go away. And Judge Caprio? He kept doing what he had always done, listening, cutting through nonsense, making dignity feel enforceable. He knew maybe better than anyone that justice is not loud most days. It is patient, repetitive, unromantic. 1,000 small refusals to let power distort what is obvious. That may be why this story hit people so hard when it spread beyond the courthouse, because it gave voice to a fear millions carry quietly, that if someone important hurts you, the system will suddenly become too complicated to care, too layered, too technical, too deferential, too afraid. Instead, on one damp Tuesday morning in Providence, the system looked that fear in the face and said no. No, your badge is not your defense. No, your urgency is not more precious than our safety. No, your rank does not convert harm into misunderstanding. No, you do not get to turn ordinary injured people into background props for your image. And when Ethan Mercer finally dropped the performance, justice did something even more surprising. It left a door open. Not a loophole, a door. A door to restitution, to humiliation turned into honesty, to service, to the long and unglamorous work of becoming the kind of man who no longer needs a badge in his hand because he has finally learned to carry responsibility in his character. That is why people who heard about this case kept repeating the same question long after the headlines faded. What actually destroyed him? Was it the body cam? The surveillance footage? The altered report? The coffee stop memo? The victim's testimonies? The answer is yes, but not fully. What destroyed the old Ethan Mercer was a room full of people refusing to pretend. A judge refusing theater. A clerk keeping the file straight. A patrol officer correcting the record. Victims insisting their pain be named. A child asking whether sorry means you have to be nice forever. That is how arrogance dies, not always with a bang, sometimes with a plain-spoken question so innocent it cuts deeper than any cross-examination. And that is why this story matters more than a viral courtroom clip. It exposes something central about justice itself. Real justice is not revenge in a robe. It is truth with structure. mercy with boundaries, accountability that restores the dignity of the harmed without surrendering the possibility that the one who caused harm might still become better. Not easier, better. If you've made it this far, drop a comment telling us the line from this story that hit you hardest. Was it, in here, your assignment is defendant? Was it, do not talk over the truth while it is still standing? Or was it little Sophia asking whether sorry means he has to be nice now forever? Like this video if you believe no badge, no title, and no position should ever put someone above the law. Hit that subscribe button if you want more real stories where justice doesn't just punish, it reveals character. And share this with someone who needs the reminder that accountability is not cruelty, and mercy is not weakness. Because the next story we're bringing you is even more unbelievable. A city inspector tried to humiliate a single mother in open court, and what the judge uncovered next left the whole room speechless.